There are forces of good and forces of evil at work in the world today. What are these forces? Who is responsible for the good? And who is responsible for the evil? Richard Shoff talks about current events which are rarely discussed by the mainstream media, events that affect us all. This program seeks to identify, to inform, and to equip the believer for what's ahead. Welcome to What in the World is Going On?
This is What in the World is Going On by your host, Richard Shoff, sponsored by Lincoln Log Homes of Kannapolis, North Carolina. We are pro-American, pro-Christian, pro-Second Amendment, pro-life, here with you by the grace of God. Today we're going to be talking to you about Alfie Evans. Who's Alfie Evans? Well, we'll learn some about it. Howard Sachs did some reporting that I'll talk to us from on several sources. But Alfie Evans was the baby that the British government medically murdered. That's right. Well, why would I be talking about something in Britain? Because, folks, the problem is not just in Britain. It's also in America. You think the issue of the baby in England is just another story of individuals dealing with a personal tragedy? If you do, you're wrong. That story involves all of us. It involves all of us in a very serious manner. It's part of the thus far nonviolent civil war we fought here in America. A war, again, like the first Civil War. A war for the soul of our country. It's the war between Western Judeo-Christian values and the values of leftism. It's the war between the individual as the focus of our lives and culture and the big city state as the focus. Just look at the stark realities that have played out in England. Its healthcare system is now completely absorbed by the state. You know, ours is well on the way to that. The focus was the state, faceless, unaccountable, a massive bureaucracy armed with tremendous power. This power is shared with the politicians up in their distant offices, the unelected judges with their lifetime appointments, and the government employee doctors all on one side, and the individuals, mom and dad and the baby, well, they were on the other side. And who do you suppose won this give and take, this healthcare transaction? Talk about inequality. Those on the left are livid if the guy next door has a BMW and themselves only a Toyota. But they don't blink an eye at the truly massive inequality inherent in state versus individual power. The state in England crushed Mom. The state in England eliminated Dad, and the state has told the baby his life is up and he's ready to die. But of course, keep in mind that all the state actors wrap up their actions in such words of kindness, compassion, and what is best for all concerned. They're serving the will of the people and acting for the common good. All their usual regressive Marxist claptrap. Now, if this is the soul of America one is fighting for, I say a plague on your house. But this indeed is the soul of the American left is battling for. The glorious state is the center of American life. This is what the Democratic Party, the New York Times op-ed writers, our mainstream media and tech elites, our university professors, leftist clergy, and Hollywood stars are all rallying up for. Government. Big controlling government. Iron-fisted power centered in Washington. They fight for this because no matter how smart, no matter the Yale or Princeton degree, no matter how sweet and well-intentioned American men and women of the left are now almost completely unmoored from the wisdom and liberalism of our great Western American Judeo-Christian values. They've brought us into what all humans tend to be attracted to, the child in us. All the world to take care of me forever, mommy and daddy, and government is for them that forever mommy and daddy of their fantasies. Those of us who have learned from our great Bible, from Western traditions, and from the American founders, we fight this poison. It's because we know that through the state can bring some good of life. When it comes to the center of life, the dominant force in a society, when it overwhelms what should be the center, namely the individual, great evil comes of that. That evil came hard in England, and now it's moving on into America, though our civil war between Americanism and leftism is a gradual thing. What comes of losing to the left is a child kidnapped by state actors for his own good, of course. What comes of losing to the left is a government standing in every examining room in America, every operating room, every emergency bay, unseen but present and powerful and demanding. It's an entity that knows nothing of you, that knows nothing of your life and your family, your desires, your needs, but it's there nonetheless, saying loud and clear, quote, "You will see the doctor I demand. Have the test I think best. Undergo the procedure I assess proper. Accept the payment I think socially just. Swallow the pill I approve. Deal with your family member in the manner I prescribe. And if you disagree or push back or do not comply, the fury and massive power we hold will be unleashed to confront you." So men and women of the left, cheer on your Obamacare, single payer, Medicare for all, and Medicaid. Cheer on the child inside you. Cheer on socialism and all of the degradation of life that comes with it. And at the end of this civil war in America, you are left wins. Keep in that mind, there's a lot to pay for this utter foolishness. Mom and dad in the guise of the state are a demanding and controlling thing. Brace yourselves to live the degrading lives of children as subjects to this raw and oppressive power. Keep in mind it never turns out well. Ask the parents in England, or, well, you can't ask their child. Ask the thousands who are going to die this year in England, waiting to get the care they need. Ask the millions in socialist Cuba about not having an aspirin available in their hospitals. Leftism poisons everything it touches, from our health care to our economy, our schools, our universities, arts, our sports, our religious institutions, and even the Boy Scouts. The child in Great Britain has no chance of ever becoming a Great Scout, not of any sort. The state in England has done with him and his parents. They're done. That's what hope and change are all about, Americans. Let's take a look at what happened. Here's some of the gruesome details reported by Jim Hoff, Dateline April 28, 2018. The gruesome details: the UK hospital starved the baby Alfie. They starved him for 4 days until he died. Baby Alfie passed away this morning at 2:30 a.m. Again, Dateline, April 28th. Baby Alfie was taken off from life support earlier this week. The doctor said he would die within minutes, but he lived. And they starved him for 4 days. British doctors would not allow baby Alfie to leave their hospital to seek help in Italy. The High Court ruled it was baby Alfie's best interest to be taken off from life support. The baby died 4 days later. Pure evil. Peter in Sweden may have said it best in a tweet. Doctors said that Alfie Evans would die peacefully within minutes of being removed from life support. Instead, he lived for 4 days and slowly and painfully starved to death. It's state execution of an innocent baby. They starved him to death. Folks, we fought Hitler to stop this kind of evil. This despite Italy offering baby Alfie Italian citizenship. This despite Italy offering baby Alfie free medical life care, supporting care. This despite the Pope offering a medical air ambulance to bring baby Alfie to Italy to proper medical care in an Italian children's hospital. It was all available, but the doctors said no. What can we do about it? Well, I've got a couple of different things that we could look at. One American view of this tragedy. Author Joe Herring wrote it well. Another child sacrificing on Britain's NHS altar. That NHS where we use it, folks, is a national health care system. I admit my reaction to the plight of young Alfie Evans is colored by my experience with my own grandson, Joseph, who suffers from a similar disorder. This writes Joe Herring. I see Joseph's innocence in Alfie's eyes, and I struggle with a marked physical resemblance between Alfie and Joseph at that age. I also vividly recall the doctors counseling my daughter to abort her pregnancy to save her child from suffering. He'll likely live 18 months, certainly no more than 3 years, they told us solemnly. Well, Joseph celebrated his 17th birthday in February of this year. Regular readers of my column, writes Herring, will know his story, how the long-sought diagnosis finally came after 16 years of trying, and how the discovery of his specific disorder, he's the only known case worldwide, how it revealed a function of human DNA previously unknown to science, a function that the understanding of which is changing the way medicines are made. I see Joseph's smile on Alfie's lips and recognize a look of trust and love. My heart is shredded over the arrogant, brutal indifference of the British National Health Service, willing to starve a child to death rather than risk another hospital proving its doctors wrong. In a world distressingly familiar with violence, injustice, and hatred, a circumstance such as this is avoidable, by no means necessary. It'll torture our souls as those charged with preventing man's inhumanity toward man pivot from protector to executioner at the behest of misbegotten laws designed to empower the state at the expense of the citizen in service to collectivism as God. Like the Nuremberg trials that made the atrocities of the Nazis all perfectly legal, even obligatory, England has adopted legislation that permits its doctors of the NHS to abrogate the rights of both patient and family with little more than a formal request to Supreme Family Courts, increasingly eager to burnish the reputation of their empty-suit, single-payer healthcare system. Alfred suffered from a degenerative brain disorder of unknown origin, and it's the opinion of his medical team at Liverpool's Alder Hey Pediatric Hospital that little of his brain remained, and that further treatment or life-sustaining efforts would not be in the child's best interest. In Britain's socialized medical system, second opinions are typically given by other NHS physicians, chosen not by the parents or the patient, but by the attending physician who gave the first opinion. Well, unsurprisingly, second opinions in the NHS rarely overturn the first. In this case, however, Alfie's parents were able to force the hospital to release the records for outside review. Unsurprisingly, Alder Hay's prognosis was not confirmed by outside medical professionals. Indeed, numerous outside experts vehemently disagreed with Alder Hay's conclusions. The disturbing truth is the physician of Alder Hayes hadn't even attempted to determine the cause of Alfie's distress, having decided within months of his birth that his life was not worth living. As revealed by the attorney for Alfie's father, Tom Evans, the position of the NHS is indeed far uglier than it appears at first look. As reported by multiple British newspapers, when the medical team have maintained that young Alfie couldn't survive absent the use of a ventilator, they predicted he would die within minutes of being removed from the ventilator, and at the time of the writing, young Alfie had been breathing unaided for more than 60 hours. They then further argued that he would have an insufficient quality of life, even if he managed to survive. Well, Tom's attorney says, we didn't challenge the medical report, but it's another thing to say that your life is futile because your quality of life is not deemed sufficient. Like the parents of Charlie Gard, another child similarly condemned to die by the NHS, Alfie's parents disagreed with the hospital's plan to abandon further treatment and remove life support from their son. They began to investigate alternatives for care outside the NHS system, never suspecting that the state-run system would see their love for their child as a threat to the NHS and would respond with such ferocity. Alder Hayes physicians were unrelenting in their abandonment of this child, having decided more than a year ago, in February of 2017, that Alfie should quit embarrassing them by surviving in despite of receiving no treatment and get on with the business of an afterlife. Since making that decision, the hospital refused to perform even the most common of procedures for a patient with Alfie's need. Such procedures to facilitate easier breathing, a feeding tube for nutrition and medication. For all of this, Alfie all this time he'd been fed through a nasal tube, never intended as a permanent solution, but rather as a stopgap measures used for weeks, not months, designed to be used until a G-tube could be placed. The medical treatment Alfie received was abominable as a direct result of the hospital's decision and the subsequent criminal obstinacy toward anyone suggesting that their prognosis might be in error. To hear the attorneys for Elder Hay wax poetic about their, quote, first-class care, end quote, given Alfie by the NSH, parroted by judge after judge in court proceedings, is indeed revolting. The British equivalent of Baghdad Bob. In truth, they made no attempt to diagnose Alfie's condition, preferring instead to place him on a heavily sedating anti-seizure medication, then claiming his lethargy is further evidence of his irreversible decline. The world was a witness to slow-motion murder. The perpetrators are the NHS, and the motive, perverse form of an institutional vanity. Italy had conferred citizenship, as we said, to Alfie, and there was a medical air ambulance standing at the request of the Pope to fly out Alfie to the Vatican's Children's Hospital, Bambino Gessi, where Alfie's condition could have been treated. But while socialism requires citizen confidence to operate, it'll settle for coercion to gain compliance. That's why Elder Hay refused to release Alfie. Should the boys have survived outside of the NHS care, their, quote, infallibility, end quote, would be shattered, and a the sheep may begin to question their shepherd. Collectivist schemes of medicine are no more sustainable or just than collectivist schemes of social order. Both require submission, even unto death. Once that logic is accepted as legitimate, the line could be pushed further back and further back in all future cases until a mere diagnosis is sufficient cause for the state to, quote, act in the patient's best interest, end quote. I can find no difference between the rationalization of the Nazis and the argument being made against Alfie Evans by the NHS. A great many evils are cloaked in compassion. Indeed, it is a rarity when evil stands naked before its victims. Nowhere is this truth more evident than in the, quote, compassion, end quote, of Elder Hay Hospital toward Alfie Evans. Would that all Britons had risen up and demanded the release of Alfie before death had its way. I had prayed for them and for the charred souls of those who are left behind, living victims of unconscionable state cruelty. The only way, the only life unworthy of life, is that not the arrogant, self-congratulatory medical murders of the NHS had their judicial enablers. May God's judgment be realized in the fullest. In a second place, and this happened here in America, it happened in America 3 years ago with a much different ending. You can see a report on it in Guns in the News. A dad in America told his son had to die like Alfie, but he resisted with guns, and his son lived. A true story, folks. I'm going to share it with you. As a tragic story of baby Alfie begins fading from the headlines, it's important to point out one thing that allowed this situation to unfold like it did. What was that one thing? Guns. Before throwing your arms in the air and screaming, "How the hell does this child's death have anything to do with guns?" Consider the following truth. The majority of the United Kingdom is unarmed, leaving most guns in the hands of criminals and government. When only government has guns, they can make decisions, like kidnapping a baby and starving him to death, without fear of recourse from the citizens or even the family. Officials in the UK sentenced baby Alfie to death when they denied his parents the ability to fly to Italy to receive free treatment at no cost to the British government. The decision was entirely arbitrary, as it had no bearing on Britain's healthcare system. They had nothing to lose by allowing the family to fly to Italy, and they had everything to gain. But instead of allowing the family a last-ditch effort to save the baby's life, however, the state effectively kidnapped him and had armed police officers standing outside the hospital to make sure he was left there to die. His parents, Kate and Tom, were helpless to resist. With an open mind, folks, consider the following tweet from Jesse Kelly. Why do I need an AR-15? Because someday the government may tell me I'm not allowed to pick my son up and put him on a plane and fly him to Italy for treatment. And believe me when I tell you, I will be putting him on that plane. While many will consider this tweet as a threat to violence toward the government, it is nothing of the sort. Kidnapping a child and starving him to death is violence. Promising you'll try to stop it by any means necessary is self-defense. But no single person with a gun could ever prevent the state from carrying out a government-sanctioned death sentence on their child for being sick, right? Wrong. Wrong, folks. George Pickering Sr. from Houston, Texas, proved this was possible just 3 years ago. Pickering's son, George Jr., was declared brain dead in 2015 after suffering a massive stroke. The decision to end Pickering's son's life had been made. However, desperate to keep his son alive, seeming knowingly something that the doctors did not, George Sr. armed himself and intervened. He said, "I felt hopeless. They were moving too fast. The hospital, the nurses, the doctors." This dedicated dad told us to Click 2 TV Houston at the time. After ending the Tomball Regional Medical Center in Houston, Texas, determined to make sure his son was given more time to recover, a standoff ensued as George Sr. barricaded himself in his son's room. George Sr. was willing to risk jail time and even death if it meant getting his son a few more minutes on this earth and a chance to survive. A SWAT team was kept at bay as an armed George Sr. sat with his son and prayed for a sign of life. George Sr.'s other son was allowed in the room and eventually talked down his father. However, because his father was armed, police held off long enough for something amazing to happen. Towards the end of the standoff, which was about 3 hours long, he felt his son squeeze his hand, family lawyer Phoebe Smith reported. At this time, the SWAT team had already opened the door to the critical care room and he had surrendered to the police. But he surrendered knowing his son had squeezed his hand. Had he not been armed, police said, they would have removed George Sr. in only a few moments, and he would never felt his son squeezing his hand, and life support would have been pulled. To confirm the father's claim that his son had shown signs of life, the SWAT team even sent in their own doctors. The SWAT team had their own doctors, and when they entered him into the critical care room, they saw my client's son was not brain dead because he was making eye contact. He was following their commands, and they were completely amazed at this, Smith added. Had an armed father not decided to take a stand, his son would likely be dead right now. The amazing thing was that my client was right and that his son did survive. When you see him now, he's a picture of health. I don't think he could have survived, but for the fact that his father slowed the process down, Smith said. This case has always been about a father protecting his son when his son could not protect himself, she said. George Sr. was charged with 2 counts of aggravated armed assault with a deadly weapon. One was later dismissed and the other lessened to a state felony charge. However, this father of 3 doesn't regret any of it, including the jail time he served afterwards. There was a law broken, but it was broken for all the right reasons. I'm here now because of it, George Jr. told Fox 6. It was love. It was love. It's the duty of a parent to protect your children, and that's all he did. Everything good that made me a man is because of that man sitting next to me. This has been What in the World is Going On? I am your host, Richard Shoff. The program is sponsored by Lincoln Log Homes. We are pro-American. We are Christian. We are pro-Second Amendment. We are pro-life. Here with you, but by the grace of God.